A woman mocked as Clumsy hides 5 years of combat flight hours behind a stethoscope, until 5 wounded SEALs land on her table and her hands stop shaking for the first time all day. If this story hits home, drop a like, tell me where in the world you're listening from, and subscribe to the Navy SEAL Nurse Stories for more. Give the 5 SEALs to the Clumsy nurse. Dr. Walter Krieger didn't lower his voice. He wanted the whole trauma bay to hear it. Riley Hayes kept her eyes on the supply cart. She counted gauze rolls she didn't need to count. "She dropped a tray this morning," Krieger said to the resident beside him. "Actual tray, actual sound. Everyone heard it." A few nurses laughed. Not cruel laughter, just tired laughter, the kind hospitals produce at 4 in the afternoon when the coffee runs out. Riley let them laugh. She'd built a whole life on letting people laugh. 18 months at Iron Bridge Regional. 18 months of dropped trays, quiet mistakes, apologies mumbled at the floor. 18 months of being the nurse nobody trusted with anything sharp. It was easier that way. Small, forgettable, safe. Her hands didn't shake because she was clumsy. They shook because stillness, real stillness, felt like standing at attention. And she couldn't afford anyone noticing how still she could actually be. "Bay 4 needs restocking," Krieger said, not looking at her. "Try not to break anything." "Yes, doctor." She said it soft, small, the voice she'd practiced until it felt like nothing. The overhead radio cracked once, then held. Dispatch, tight and fast. "Incoming mass casualty. 5 patients, military personnel. ETA 6 minutes. Training incident, joint exercise. Secondary explosion reported. 1 critical, unresponsive. Trauma teams to bay." The bay went from tired to electric in half a second. Krieger straightened his coat like a man preparing for a photograph. 5 operators. "This is a real trauma day, people. Hayes, stay out of the way." Riley's jaw tightened, just slightly, just for a heartbeat. Stay out of the way. She'd flown Apache gunships 1,100 feet over burning compounds with rounds pinging off the airframe. She'd walked into debriefs where 4-star generals asked her opinion before they asked anyone else's. She'd talked wounded operators through their own extraction on a headset while an engine screamed, "Stay out of the way." She picked up a clipboard because it gave her hands something to hold that wasn't a fist. Nurse Priya Okafor caught her eye across the bay. Priya was the only one who ever really looked at her, who noticed the calluses under the latex gloves, the way Riley's gaze swept a room before she entered it. "You good?" Priya asked. "I'm fine." "You always say that right before something happens." Riley didn't answer. Outside, past the glass doors, she could already hear it. Rotor wash, a Black Hawk low and fast, coming in on the helipad 200 yards out. The sound hit something old in her chest, not fear, recognition, like hearing your own name spoken in another room. 5 operators, a training accident. A secondary explosion nobody expected. She thought of every mission briefing that started exactly that way, every time the neat plan on paper met the actual dirt and the actual fire and fell apart in real time. Krieger clapped his hands twice, herding staff toward the ambulance bay doors. "Move, people. 5 SEALs, 90 seconds out. Let's not embarrass ourselves in front of real heroes." Real heroes. Riley followed the crowd toward the doors, clipboard against her chest, shoulders rounded, chin down. The posture she'd built brick by brick for 18 months. Somewhere behind her ribs, a different posture was already waking up. The doors slid open, wind and noise and red light poured in. 5 stretchers, 5 sets of desert camouflage soaked dark. 5 men who had trusted a training plan that had just tried to kill them. And Riley Hayes, standing at the edge of the chaos, feeling something in her spine straighten half an inch before she could stop it. Krieger didn't notice. Nobody noticed. Not yet. But 6 minutes ago, dispatch had said one word that made her stomach drop before her mind caught up. Helicopter. She had flown into worse. She had flown into far worse. The question was whether she could keep her hand soft enough one more time to hide it. The stretchers came through fast, wheels screaming against tile. First one, GSW report unclear, possible shrapnel, chest wound, SATs dropping. A medic shouted, running alongside. Krieger pointed without looking. Bay 1, Bay 2, spread them out. Hayes, Bay 4, minor triage, try to keep up. Bay 4. The soft lane. The lane for sprains and scared families, not gunshot wounds. Riley took her spot anyway. Obedient. Small. The man on her stretcher was young, maybe 24, dog tags tangled with a torn chest rig. His name patch read, Whitlock. Below it, faded, a patch she recognized instantly, Naval Special Warfare. Vitals, she said, voice flat and careful. BP 90/60, heart rate 140, breath sounds diminished left side. The medic answered, already moving to the next bed. Diminished breath sounds. Tachycardia, hypotension. Every cell in Riley's body recognized the pattern before her training ID even confirmed it. Tension pneumothorax. She looked toward Bay 1, where Krieger stood over the most critical patient, barking orders that sounded confident and were, underneath the confidence, 6 seconds too slow. Get me imaging, Krieger snapped. I need to see before I commit to anything invasive. Imaging would take 4 minutes. This man had maybe 90 seconds. Riley's patient, the one they'd waved off as minor triage, arched suddenly on the gurney. A strangled gasp. His trachea shifted, visible even through the collar of his uniform. He's crashing, Riley said. No one heard her. The bay was too loud, too full of Krieger's voice. He's crashing, she said again, louder. A junior nurse glanced over, uncertain. Doctor, Krieger's busy, he said, minor triage. He is not minor. Riley's hands were already moving. Gloves, antiseptic swab. Her fingers found the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line without hesitation, the way another person's fingers might find a light switch in a dark, familiar room. What are you doing? The junior nurse whispered, alarmed. Saving his life. 14 gauge, now. The nurse froze. Riley didn't wait. She'd already palmed the angiocath from the crash cart, checked the gauge with a glance instead of a read, the kind of speed that came from doing this exact motion at 11,000 feet with someone screaming in her headset. The needle went in at a precise angle, sliding just over the third rib to avoid the neurovascular bundle beneath. A hiss, sharp, audible, unmistakable, trapped air escaping under pressure. The young SEAL's chest, which had been rising in short, desperate stutters, suddenly eased. His color, gray a moment before, began climbing back toward pink. SATs climbing, the junior nurse said. Stunned. 91, 93. Riley exhaled, slow, controlled, the way she used to exhale after clearing a hot LZ. For 3 full seconds, Bay 4 was silent except for the monitor's steadying rhythm. Then a voice from the next stretcher, hoarse, half-conscious, cut through everything. Talon. Riley's whole body locked. It wasn't a name a civilian would use. It wasn't a name anyone at Ironbridge Regional had ever spoken. It was a call sign, buried under classification, spoken only over encrypted freck in the worst 5 minutes of some very bad missions. Her spine snapped straight before she could stop it. Her chin came up, her shoulders squared. Parade ground square. The posture she had spent 18 months burying under slouched apology. She caught herself half a second too late. Across the bay, Master Chief Dane Whitlock, blood-streaked and barely conscious, was staring straight at her with an expression that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with recognition. I know that voice, he rasped. I know that exact voice over the net, telling us the birds were 30 seconds out. Krieger, finally noticing the commotion, turned from Bay 1. What is going on over here? Riley's hands, steady and precise a moment before, dropped back into her lap. folded small again. But it was too late. Everyone in Bay 4 had already seen the other version of her, just for 3 seconds, standing at full height. "Nothing is going on," Riley said quickly. Patient stabilized, tension pneumothorax, resolved with needle decompression, SATs improving. Krieger crossed the bay in 4 long strides, staring at the angiocath, still seated in Whitlock's second intercostal space, like it had appeared there by accident. "You did this?" He was crashing. There wasn't time for imaging. "You performed an invasive procedure without authorization." Krieger's voice climbed, more embarrassed than angry. The particular anger of a man realizing he'd been wrong in front of witnesses. "Do you understand the liability? He'd be dead in 90 seconds if I'd waited for you to finish your imaging order," Riley said. Her voice had changed. Quieter but harder, each word placed like a footstep on ice she trusted completely. The bay had gone silent enough that everyone heard it. Whitlock, propped up now, breathing easier, found enough strength for a rough laugh. "She's not wrong, Doc. She just saved my life in about 6 seconds. 6 seconds. Another SEAL, 2 stretchers down, muttered. "Figures. Talon never did wait for a clean approach vector." Krieger's eyes narrowed. "Talon? What is that? Some kind of nickname?" Whitlock's gaze didn't leave Riley. "You don't recognize her, Doc? Guess she looks different without the flight suit and the headset." "I don't know what he's talking about," Riley said, too fast. "Extraction, 18 months back," Whitlock continued, ignoring her, words coming slower now as the adrenaline started to fade. "Compound got hit harder than Intel said. We were pinned in a courtyard, taking fire from 2 directions, and some Apache pilot with the steadiest voice I ever heard walked us through a gap in the wall while she put 2 hellfires through the building, holding the second position. The trauma bay had gone very quiet. Priya, restocking a nearby cart, had stopped moving entirely. "That pilot's call sign was Talon," Whitlock said. "First name we ever got was Ma'am. Never saw her face. Never expected to hear her voice again in a hospital in the middle of Ohio, telling some idiot nurse to hand her a 14 gauge. "I'm not," Riley started. "You reacted to the call sign," Whitlock said, gentler now, almost kind. "Before you could stop yourself. I watched you do it. Whoever you're pretending to be, Mom, your body remembers exactly who you are, even if your mouth doesn't." Krieger looked between them, calculation shifting behind his eyes, embarrassment curdling into something sharper. "This is absurd," he said. "She's a nurse with a spotty employment history and unauthorized clinical behavior. I want an incident report on my desk within the hour." "Doc," Whitlock said, wincing as he shifted. "With respect, if she hadn't put a needle in my chest, you'd be filling out a very different kind of report." Krieger's mouth opened, then closed. He turned instead toward Bay 1, toward the critical patient still waiting on imaging he hadn't ordered fast enough, and barked at a resident to move faster. Riley used the moment to step back from Whitlock's bed, breath uneven, hands trembling now for a completely different reason than the ones she usually faked. 18 months of careful invisibility, unraveling in under a minute, because of a call sign spoken by a half-conscious man who happened to remember her voice better than she'd hoped anyone ever would. Priya appeared at her elbow, voice low. "Riley, what was that?" "Not now," Riley whispered. But 4 other stretchers still needed her, 4 other operators from that same accident, and somewhere behind her eyes, the woman she'd buried for 18 months was already awake, already assessing the room, already counting exits and injuries with a speed no clumsy nurse ever could have managed. The next 20 minutes blurred into motion. A second SEAL, call sign unknown to her, had a fractured femur and a laceration that needed pressure, not panic. Riley worked fast, hands sure, voice calm, and nobody questioned her anymore. Not out loud, anyway. A third had minor burns from the secondary explosion, more shaken than hurt. A fourth needed sutures along his forearm, done in under 4 minutes with stitches so clean the attending resident actually stopped to look. The fifth, the one Krieger had called critical, needed surgery. Real surgery, immediate, no more delays. Krieger's imaging had confirmed it eventually. Internal bleeding, splenic injury, the kind of case that couldn't be talked through with a needle and steady hands. It required an OR, and OR scheduling was backed up. And for 6 long minutes it looked like the operating room wouldn't be ready in time. Riley found herself standing beside Krieger's shoulder without quite deciding to. "You need to bump the OR," she said. "Whatever's in there that isn't life-threatening, it waits." "I don't need triage advice from a nurse who just performed an unauthorized procedure. You need someone who's run mass casualty triage before, and right now that's me." Krieger turned, finally really looking at her, the way people look at something they can't quite categorize anymore. "Who are you?" "Someone trying to keep your patient alive," Riley said. "Or 3, bump it, now." For one long second, Krieger looked like he might refuse purely on principle. Then Whitlock, still on his stretcher nearby, called out, voice rough but carrying. "Doc, at this point I'd just do what she says. It's working out pretty well for the rest of us." Krieger's jaw tightened. He grabbed the phone, made the call, bumped the elective case scheduled in OR 3. 11 minutes later, the critical seal was in surgery, stable enough to have a real chance. Riley stepped back into the hallway, chest heaving with something that wasn't quite exhaustion. An administrator found her there. Grace Liu, hospital compliance, clipboard already out, expression unreadable. "Nurse Hayes, I need to ask you some questions about the procedure you performed in Bay 4. I stabilized a patient with a tension pneumothorax. He would have died without intervention." "That's not standard nursing scope of practice." "No," Riley agreed. "It isn't." Liu studied her for a long moment. "There's also the matter of your employment file. 18 months here, and before that, 4 different hospitals in 4 different states, each stay under a year, each one ending abruptly. No disciplinary flags, just gaps, like you kept disappearing." Riley said nothing. "Master Chief Whitlock is telling anyone who'll listen that you flew close air support on his extraction 18 months ago. Liu continued. "That's either the strangest coincidence I've encountered in this job, or it's true. And if it's true, I need to know why an active or former military aviator has been working my trauma bay under a fake employment history." "I never lied about my nursing license," Riley said quietly. "Everything on it is real." "That's not what I asked." Down the hall, a new sound was building. Boots, several pairs, moving with purpose, unhurried but absolutely certain of where they were going. Riley recognized the rhythm before she saw the uniforms. Military police, and behind them, a man in a flight suit she recognized instantly, someone from her old unit, someone who should not have known where to find her. Whatever explanation she'd planned to give, Liu evaporated. The past hadn't just found her, it had brought backup. The man in the flight suit stopped just inside the trauma bay doors, scanning faces until he found hers. "Chief Warrant Officer Hayes," he said, and his voice carried the particular formality of someone speaking for the record. "Colonel Reyes sends his regards. He'd like to know why a decorated Apache pilot with 1,100 combat flight hours filed paperwork requesting indefinite unpaid leave, then vanished from every system that could track her." Krieger, hovering nearby, made a small strangled sound. "Chief Warrant Officer." "Captain Voss," Riley said, recognizing him now. An old logistics officer from her brigade. "You didn't need to come in person. You stopped answering calls. Command doesn't love it when decorated aviators disappear into the civilian world without so much as a change of address." Liu, compliance clipboard still in hand, looked between them like she was watching a language she almost understood. "Someone want to explain what's happening in my trauma bay?" Voss glanced at Krieger, then at the row of wounded SEALs. several of whom were watching with open, delighted interest despite their injuries. 4 years ago, Voss said, Chief Warrant Officer Hayes flew close air support for more high-risk extractions than almost anyone in her brigade's history. She flew through weather nobody should fly through, into landing zones nobody should land in, and she brought every crew home that her aircraft could physically save. Her call sign was Talon. Ask anyone who served with the 1st Combat Aviation Brigade. Whitlock, from his stretcher, added, Can confirm, personally. After her 3rd tour, Voss continued, She requested leave following an incident that isn't public record, and I'm not going to make it public record here. She said she needed distance. Command granted it. What command did not grant was permission to disappear so completely that annual check-ins stopped working. Riley felt every eye in the bay on her now, and for the first time in 18 months, she didn't shrink from it. I burned 3 friends' faces into my memory the last time I flew a mission that went wrong, she said, low but steady. I couldn't save one of them. I requested leave because I couldn't get back in a cockpit without seeing his face on the windshield glass. I became a nurse because it was the only work I could think of that still meant something, and I didn't put my rank on the application because I didn't want anyone treating me like a hero. I just wanted to help people without anyone asking me to fly again. The bay was silent except for monitors beeping their steady rhythms. Krieger, to his credit, looked genuinely shaken for the first time all day. You've been hiding, on purpose, in my trauma bay. I've been working, Riley said. Same as everyone else here. Voss cleared his throat. For what it's worth, ma'am, Command isn't here to drag you back. I'm here because your file needs updating, and because Colonel Reyes wanted you to know something directly, from someone you'd trust. What? The man you think you couldn't save, Staff Sergeant Alvarez. He made it. Coma for 6 weeks, but he made it. He's been asking about you for a year. Nobody could find you to tell him you were alive, let alone the other way around. Riley's carefully rebuilt composure cracked down the middle. For 18 months, she had carried a single frozen image, a windshield, a face, an ending she had never confirmed because confirming it felt like something she couldn't survive. She had built an entire disguise, an entire smaller life, around a death that had never actually happened. He's alive, she repeated, testing the words like they might not hold weight. Walking with a cane, Voss said, ornery as ever. Wants to know why his favorite pilot ghosted the entire United States Army. Somewhere behind Riley, Whitlock started laughing, then winced, then laughed again anyway. I don't know whether to salute you or ask you to check my stitches, Krieger said, and for once there was no mockery in it at all. By evening, the trauma bay had settled into its usual rhythm, monitors beeping, carts rolling, but something in the air had shifted permanently. Riley sat with Voss in a quiet corner near the nurse's station, a cup of vending machine coffee going cold in her hands. Command wants to offer you something, Voss said. Not a recall to active flight duty. Nobody's asking you back in a cockpit if you're not ready, but there's a program starting, joint initiative between Special Operations Command and Civilian Trauma Networks. They call it Tactical Trauma Aviation Integration. It needs someone who understands both worlds. Someone who can bridge medevac timing, close air support coordination, and trauma bay triage without losing 6 precious seconds explaining jargon to people who've never heard it. You're describing my entire life, Riley said. I'm describing the only person in the army who's actually lived it, Voss said. Reyes wants you to lead it. Full rank restored, full benefits, and you get to decide how much time you spend in a cockpit versus a trauma bay. Could be mostly training, could be mostly consulting. Your call. Riley looked toward the trauma bay, where Whitlock, now stable and stitched and thoroughly pleased with himself, was telling the story of the needle decompression to a nurse who clearly didn't believe half of it. I like this work, Riley said slowly. The nursing. I didn't expect to, but I do. Nobody's asking you to give it up. This program needs exactly what you already are, pilot and nurse. Nobody else on the roster can say both. Krieger appeared at the edge of the conversation, hovering with the particular awkwardness of a man trying to apologize without quite knowing how. "Chief Warrant Officer Hayes," he said, testing the title like unfamiliar terrain. "I owe you an apology. I called you clumsy in front of my entire staff. I assigned you the softest lane in my trauma bay because I assumed a nurse who dropped a tray couldn't handle real trauma. I was wrong in almost every possible way a person can be wrong." "You were wrong," Riley agreed. There was no cruelty in it, just fact. "For what it's worth," Krieger continued, "the incident report I threatened you with this afternoon isn't happening. I'm writing a commendation instead. If the hospital board wants to argue about scope of practice, they can argue with the 5 men in my recovery ward who are alive because you ignored every rule I gave you." "I'd do it again," Riley said. "Every time. I'm starting to believe that." Krieger extended a hand, an old-fashioned gesture that felt, for once, entirely sincere. "For whatever it's worth, this hospital could use someone who teaches the rest of us what real triage under pressure actually looks like." Riley shook his hand. "I might take you up on that. Part-time, maybe, between flight training rotations." Priya appeared with 2 fresh coffees, handing one to Riley without a word, settling into the chair beside her like she'd earned the right to be there, which, after 18 months of noticing what nobody else noticed, she absolutely had. "So," Priya said, "Chief Warrant Officer, Talon, any other secret identities I should know about before my next shift?" "That's the whole list," Riley said. And for the first time in 18 months, the smile that crossed her face wasn't small or careful or built to be forgettable. It was just real. Down the hall, Whitlock's voice rose again, retelling the needle decompression story for a 3rd time, embellishing it slightly more with each pass, insisting the hiss of escaping air had practically knocked him unconscious with relief. Riley let him have it. Heroes needed good stories as much as anyone else did, and for once, she wasn't the one hiding from hers. She thought of Alvarez, walking with a cane somewhere 3 states away, ornery and alive, and asking about her for a year, while she'd hidden inside a version of herself built entirely from guilt. Guilt made a convincing disguise. It just wasn't a very good place to live. Tomorrow she would call him. Tonight, she let herself sit in a hospital hallway, surrounded by people who finally knew exactly who she was and felt something loosen in her chest that had been locked tight for a very long time. Respect isn't handed out with a title, and it isn't taken away by one either. It's built, quietly, in the 6 seconds between someone else's fear and your own steady hands. Riley Hayes had spent 18 months hiding those hands. She didn't plan on hiding them again. Later that night, walking to her car under a sky full of stars she hadn't bothered to notice in over a year, Riley pulled out her phone and stared at a number she still had memorized. Alvarez's old unit line, the one that would connect her to someone who could pass along a message. Her thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment. Then she pressed it, and for the first time in 18 months, she didn't rehearse a smaller version of her own voice before she spoke. "Hi," she said when the line connected. "It's Talon. Tell him I'm still flying, just a different kind of aircraft these days." She hung up, smiling, walked the rest of the way to her car with her shoulders back and her chin level, and didn't once look down at the ground to check if anyone was watching. Nobody needed to watch anymore. She had nothing left to hide.